Right, good morning, grade 12s. We're going to go into the next lesson for chapter 5 today. The topic for the day is protectionism. And in your textbook, we are on page 101. Yeah, page 101. Just before I start teaching, I want you to look at your exam guideline. You will see, as I mentioned over the last two lessons, that export promotion and import substitution, those are your two possible essay questions. Export promotion, import substitution. They can ask either export promotion or import substitution, or they can combine the two. Right, this is today's lesson, protectionism. You will see the only thing that you need to do here is explain the arguments in favor of protection. You will see in the lesson itself and in your textbook, there's also a section on arguments against protectionism, because that used to be in the syllabus, but it isn't anymore. So when we go to that section, I'm going to show you exactly what you're going to scratch out. You do not need to study that because it is not on your exam guideline. We are only going to study the arguments in favor of protection. And you can see it is not an essay question. It will be a discuss question, discuss for 8 question, or an additional part to your essay question, as you could see then in the activity that I sent earlier. Right. So if we go to the lesson itself, what is protectionism? Okay, now yesterday we spoke about import substitution, and import substitution, the forms of import substitution, the taxes, the quotas, those are basically forms of protection. That's the measures that we use to protect our local industries. But when we do look at the definition of protectionism, it means that we are implementing policies to protect our domestic producers against unfair foreign competition. All right. So when we feel that our industries needs to be protected from foreign competition, we are going to implement certain protective measures. And you can see here in the definition, how can we protect them? By using tariffs or customs duties. We can use quotas or any of the other measures that we looked at yesterday. Sanctions, trade prohibition, imports, deposits, any of those measures can be used to protect our local industries. Right, now you will see my headings is not in the same order as on the guideline, but all the guideline headings is covered here. Okay, just not in the same order. The first reason that we like, and some countries like, to protect their industries is the infant industry argument. All right, now what this basically means is when a new business is established, initially their fixed costs are very, very high. All right, when I just establish a business, that means that I have to buy a building. Now I have to buy a property to run my business from. I need to buy all the machinery. I need to buy all the raw materials. And I haven't even started producing yet. All right. And a new business cannot just go into mass production straight away. Initially, they will start production slowly. So their high fixed costs has to be covered by a smaller production run, less goods that they are being produced. All right. Now, because their production costs are so high, remember your selling prices is based on your production cost. Once you know what the average costs are, you're going to add your profit, and that is going to give you the price. All right. So when their production costs are high because they have a lot of expenses when they just start the business, because of those higher production costs, obviously their selling prices will also be higher. All right. So it's difficult for these new businesses to compete with other businesses that have been in existence for many, many, many years. All right. Obviously, the idea is that we give these new businesses, these newly established businesses, we want to support them. We want people to support them so that we give them a chance. Now, once they have been established and once they've been in production for a couple of years, obviously, the hope is that their production costs will decrease over time. As they start doing mass production, as they get better at what they are doing, their production costs will decrease. But if we do not protect them, okay, if we leave them and they can't compete, when we allow imports to come into the country and those imports are cheaper, obviously consumers will rather buy the cheaper imported product, and then nobody supports the local industry and it kind of goes out of business. Okay, before it could actually get better at what they do, they actually close down because nobody's supporting them. All right. So in order for these industries to be established and to survive, we need to protect them against foreign producers that have been in business for a long, long time. Because if you've been in business for a long, long time, obviously your property has been paid for, right? Your machinery has been paid for. Those are the expensive things. So their production costs are much lower and their prices are much lower. And our newly established businesses, they cannot compete with that. It is very difficult for our newly established businesses to compete with established businesses like that. And sometimes also, if those established industries from other countries use unfair trade methods like dumping and like price wars, it becomes even more difficult for our businesses to compete. Okay, remember we did refer to dumping also when we did export promotion. Dumping is when a foreign business sells their excess production, their surpluses, they come and sell in our country at a very, very low price, sometimes even lower than their production cost. Dumping is done purely with the intention of forcing out the local producers. Once the local producers are forced out because they cannot survive, they cannot compete against these low prices, then they raise their prices and now they've captured the whole market. All right. So it's very, very difficult for our established industries to compete against businesses that involve themselves in dumping. All right. Price wars. Remember, we did speak about price wars, I think, last year also. Okay, remember, price war is where businesses keep decreasing their prices. If there's 5 competing businesses, and one will decrease his price, the others all have to decrease their prices in order to survive, to stay competitive. Then the first business takes their prices down again, and the others are forced to decrease their prices also. The whole idea with the price war is that the one with the strongest financial backing is going to survive. Eventually, with the price war, they actually sell at the price that is so low also that they're making losses. And newly established businesses cannot afford to make losses. They haven't got previous years of profits and whatever hidden away. They cannot afford to make a loss. They need to survive. So if there is a price war in that industry, there's no way that they're actually going to survive this. Okay, so it's unfair to make them compete against businesses making use of these methods. All right, so the idea is that we grant them protection for a temporary period of time. It's a temporary protective measure. We're not going to do this forever. We're not going to say, right, you're a newly established industry. We are going to put an import tax on your competitors from other countries like until the end of time. They're going to say, right, we realize you're a new industry. You have just been established. We are going to offer you protection for 10 years. Now, after 10 years, you need to be efficient and you need to get your costs down by yourself. All right. It's a temporary measure. It is not there forever. It is just to give this new business a chance to be properly established and to survive those first couple of years when profits are very difficult to make, so that over time they grow and they get better and they become more efficient and their cost becomes down and their quality increases, and then they can actually survive on their own. Right, the second reason is that we need to protect our strategic industries and we need to become nationally more independent. All right. Now, your strategic industries, anything that is necessary for the country to kind of carry on, will be regarded as a strategic industry. So not any industry is a strategic industry. Like at the moment now in South Africa, food production, agriculture, the farmers, they will be classified as strategic industry because they're making food. All right. So agriculture, more often than not, will be classified as strategic. Things like Eskom. Okay, Eskom is a strategic industry. If we're always wondering why the government keeps bailing them out, why the government keeps giving them money, because it is of strategic importance that we have electricity. Our country cannot function without electricity. So it is a strategic industry. All right. So our strategic industries are very important for us to maintain our independence and our national security. Okay, food security is part of national security. National security is not always just about the defense force. All right. So these can include products that can be essential in times of war or conflict, all right, or when we've got sanctions. So if we are unable to get certain products from other countries as a result of sanctions, those industries will be classified as strategic. Now, whatever is classified as strategic will change over time. All right. So when there's an international depression or natural disaster, at the moment, internationally, this coronavirus obviously is creating recessions internationally. There's very few countries, I think at last count there was like 6 countries in the world that has not been affected by this. All right, so obviously in times like these, certain industries will definitely be strategic because it is something that our survival kind of depends on. All right, so the point here is that protection should be granted to our key industries. All right, so those industries that is important for our national survival, for our independence, for our people to survive, those industries should be protected. All right. The examples there, the iron and the steel industry, obviously that's used to be state parastatals, they're not anymore. Okay, but it is vital that we process our own raw materials, that we don't export unprocessed things. Now we want value-added exports. And there's agriculture as well. Right, yeah, I make a whole list. The food, fuel and energy. Food, as I said, farmers is always strategic industries. If we don't have food, we all die. All right. If there's no electricity, fuel, energy, electricity, and petrol, our economy cannot function. All right. All of those industries are of strategic importance to the country. It is vital for us to have them. All right. Now, during apartheid, South African government subsidized the development of businesses like Sasol, like Armscor, like Iscor, like SAA, all of them to maintain national security, all right, to protect the country. Sasol, the whole idea behind Sasol, I mentioned it before, is that the idea was, obviously we don't have any oil in our country, we have coal. So Sasol was established by the previous government so that it could reduce our dependence on oil, okay? Because we don't have oil, we have to import oil. Sasol is the only petrol in South Africa that is actually made from coal, all right? It's locally produced, all right? The idea was that Sasol would grow and that they would produce enough fuel kind of for the country so we don't have to import oil anymore. Obviously, they don't have the capacity to produce enough petrol for the whole country. So we still do import oil, but we are able to import less. Okay, so we don't rely 100% on other countries anymore because we are able to do it ourselves. Armscor, Denel, okay, we spoke about them as well. Remember, they were also started by the previous government when we had sanctions against South Africa, when we were not allowed to buy any kind of weapons to protect the country. No other country in the world would sell us. All right, so obviously it is important for national security. Okay, the Defence Force, the Army, obviously they need to have weapons. So the government established Armscor then to protect our national security. All right, so it's very important that we always make sure there's an adequate supply of essential goods and services so that we don't have to depend on other countries. All right, in these times now, like with the COVID-19, if we had to rely on other countries to provide us food, we would have a serious problem. All right, because most of the countries, well, I would say all of our trading partner countries, I would easily say yes, all of our trading partner countries have been hit by COVID-19, and they've been hit more severely than us, by far more severely than us, all right? So production in those countries, we've been in lockdown for like a month, right? Less than a month. But in other countries, they've been in lockdown for many months. So production in those countries are very low. Whatever they produce, they're going to supply their own people. They're not going to say, "Sis toch shame, South Africa, let's give them some." No, they're going to look after themselves first. So we have to make sure in our own country that in times like these, we have enough essential goods and services. Food, we need enough food. We need enough medical supplies. There are certain things that we must have enough on. We cannot depend on other countries to provide us with these things. All right. So these industries should be granted some protection. All right. And for the example, in agriculture, there are many industries in our country agricultural industries that do receive some protection. All right. The dairy industry is subsidized, for example. Bread manufacturers, they are subsidized. Chicken, we used to have a lot of quotas and stuff on chicken. Okay, textiles, that's an agricultural industry. If we don't protect those industries, they might not survive. And then jobs are going to be lost. All right. The third reason is that it does promote employment. Okay, so trade protection is a measure to control unemployment. Obviously, in South Africa, we do have a very high unemployment rate, and watch the space, it is about to get worse. With this lockdown, with people not being able to work, businesses do not have money to employ as many people. The predictions for unemployment does not look good, right? Unemployment is going to increase in the next couple of months, and it already has. And this obviously causes a lot of economic and social hardship. We see it on the news. If you're following the news, if you're on social media, you can see people, there's looting already in some areas because people don't have food. If they're not allowed to work, they don't have an income. But just because you don't have an income doesn't mean that you don't get hungry anymore. All right, so as soon as the unemployment rate increases, it does create other social issues as well, like violence, community violence, like looting. People are scared, people are hungry. All right, so it is a very important objective of government to reduce unemployment and to keep unemployment in check. And one way of protecting or reducing unemployment, or to prevent unemployment from increasing, is to protect the jobs of workers who are currently already working. We have a lot of people unemployed. We cannot allow some of our industries that might not be able to survive if they have to compete against foreign competition. They're going to close down and people are going to lose their jobs. We can't have that. All right, so we need to protect the jobs of people that are already working in various industries. And that can only happen if businesses that employ those people can successfully carry on. We can allow them to continue to produce, and if they want to continue to produce, we need to support them. All right, they need to be able to sell what they are producing in order so that they can have an income. If businesses can carry on and businesses can produce stuff and businesses can sell their products, obviously they will get an income and they can afford to pay their workers and nobody will lose their jobs. All right, so by restricting foreign goods that is entering the country, okay, by not allowing just anything to come into the country, we can look after our domestic businesses where they can produce more. If we can help people, or we can force, I suppose is the right word, force people to buy local goods instead of buying imported goods. Now, remember what I said yesterday. If we buy Chinese stuff in the shops, we are sending money to China. We are creating jobs for Chinese people. We don't want to create jobs for Chinese people. We've got nothing against Chinese people. Well, some people do now, okay? But it's not that we don't want to support China, but we need to support the growth of our own economy. So if we force people, if we have to force them, then so be it, that to buy local goods from local sources, our local businesses get times to grow, our local businesses get to make profit, and our local people get to have jobs. All right. So it is very important that we protect the jobs in our country so that people can continue working, that we do not create even a bigger unemployment rate. All right, and one way of protecting employment is to protect our industries. Now we have to support our industries so that they can survive. Right, then it also prevents dumping. This is a big one. This is one that I like asking also. Okay, I'm going to say again, what is dumping? It has nothing to do with dumping your waste in the veld. In an economic sense, dumping means a foreign firm will sell its products in a different country at a lower price than what they charge in the domestic market, or at a lower price than what is used in that other foreign market. All right. So, for example, if there's dumping, a producer in another country is going to come and sell their surplus goods in our country at a price that is very, very low. All right. So they sell, the price that they're selling at is so low, it's lower than what they're charging in their own country, and it's much lower than what others are charging in our own country. And as I said the other day, sometimes it is even so low that they're actually selling at a loss. Now, they don't care about making a profit. They want to get rid of their surplus goods. They just actually want to make some money out of it. All right. Now, when there is dumping, obviously it makes it very difficult for your local producers to compete because they have to make a profit. They cannot take their prices down so low that they don't make a profit, right? They have to make a profit in order for them to survive. All right. So what happens now, if, let's say, China dumps things in South Africa, okay? They dump, I don't know, textiles, whatever, all right? So our local textile companies, they have to make a profit. If China now comes and they sell their textiles at a very low price because they just want to get rid of it and they want to force our producers out of the market, if the local textiles are like 20 Rand and the imported textiles is 10 Rand, what are consumers going to buy? Consumers have limited income. They need to get by with their money. They are looking for the best deal. So they're obviously not going to look and ask, where does these textiles come from, right? They're going to just look at the price and say, right, this one is cheaper. If I buy this piece of material, obviously I can buy twice as much, because it's cheap, all right? So what happens now is everybody supports these Chinese textile businesses that are dumping, and our local textile industries, they cannot survive because nobody's buying from them. Eventually, our local textile industries closes down. People are going to lose their jobs. All right. Now, normally what happens with dumping is that these dumped goods are highly subsidized in their own country. All right. There's an activity, it's not in this chapter, it might have been in grade 11, I'm not sure, where, in the European Union, in the European Union, milk is heavily subsidized, right? Because milk is an essential thing, for people, they need the milk, right? So when milk is subsidized, to encourage farmers to produce more milk. It's more profitable for farmers to produce milk because it's now subsidized, it's decreasing their production costs, so their supply increases. With the result that too much milk is produced in the European Union. All right, because of that subsidy. That subsidy is the only reason why they are overproducing, and then they take that overproduced milk and they come and dump it in a developing country, let's say like Mozambique or something, and the milk is very cheap because it is subsidized. All right. In Mozambique, their government is poor. Mozambique is a poor developing country. Their government doesn't have money to subsidize the dairy farmers. So the Mozambican milk is expensive, more expensive than the dumped European milk. All right. So because those goods are subsidized, it is creating dumping. If you think back to the first lesson of this chapter, that was one of the disadvantages of export subsidies, is that it can lead to dumping, which is unfair. It is frowned upon. It's not a nice thing to do, because if European milk gets sold in Mozambique and all the dairy farmers in Mozambique closes down, it's creating a big problem of unemployment in an already stressed out country. All right. Or the dumped goods, like in the case of China, is produced in low-wage, labor-intensive factories. Okay, in South Africa, our textile industries have to abide by the law. We have minimum wages. We have lots and lots of legislation that our businesses actually have to comply with. In China, they don't have those legislations. So in China, they can make the people work for long, long hours. They can pay them next to nothing to work those long hours. They can mistreat their workers, and by doing so, they're keeping their production costs low. So they have a low production cost, not because they're better or more efficient or whatever, because they're exploiting their workers. We don't do that. We pay minimum wages, we treat our workers better, and therefore our production costs are higher. So our production cost is higher for a good reason. All right. Now China comes and dumps here because their labor laws are not as strict as ours. It is unfair. It is creating unfair competition. Okay. So dumping is a very nice way for some of those subsidized industries or those industries that's not regulated as much to capture new markets and force those local industries completely out of the market. All right, so in my milk example from earlier, if the European milk gets dumped in Mozambique, all the Mozambican farmers will stop producing milk and people are going to lose their jobs. They are the weaker industry. They're going to be forced out of the market. And now remember, your developing countries rely on agriculture. Most of their GDP comes from agriculture. And now they are losing those agricultural sectors. That is all they have. And now we are taking that away from them. All right. Now, dumping, as I said, it's not illegal. It is frowned upon. Okay. It's not a nice thing to do. It is not fair trade practice. Okay. But even with the World Trade Organization, remember they want us to promote free trade. Even the World Trade Organization allows for governments to use protection against countries that is guilty of dumping. All right, because dumping creates unfair competition. We are allowed to protect ourselves against dumping. All right, because it is anti-competitive. Now, as I said, it's not fair trade practice. Okay. The next advantage of using protection is that we can stabilize our exchange rate and the balance of payments. Okay, now obviously remember any exports and imports will influence the exchange rate and it will influence the balance of payments as well. So it's very important that the government monitors international trade. They need to see how much money is going out, how much money is coming in, so that we can keep our balance of payments healthy. Right, now when we use protectionism is there to protect our local industries by reducing imports. So when we use protective measures, the whole idea is that our exports will increase, or exports will stay the same, but our imports will decrease. All right, so if we are importing too much, if we are importing more than what we are exporting, remember that is going to cause a deficit on the balance of payments. And we are going to end up borrowing money to get rid of that deficit on the balance of payments. And we don't want to do that, because that increases government debt, and then the government needs to raise more revenue, and then they get that from us in the form of taxes. We don't want that. All right. So we don't want our imports to be higher than our exports. All right. So what we need to do what we can to decrease our imports, to decrease the flow of money out of the country. Okay, and if less money is flowing out because we're paying for imports, we can actually protect the balance of payments, we can decrease the deficit, or if we are lucky, we can actually create a surplus. All right. In terms of the exchange rate, okay, remember any imports and export activities means that rand is either going to be bought or sold, and that is going to impact on the value of the rand. If we are able to decrease imports, now remember when we import stuff, we need to pay, if we import stuff from China, right? We need to pay China in yuan. So what we need to do is on the foreign exchange market, we need to buy yuan. We do that by selling rand. So if we are selling rand and selling rand and selling rand, we are obviously making rand too easily available on the markets. But if anything that is freely available is obviously going to decrease the price. All right, so if there's a high level of imports and we are selling too much rand, it is going to cause the rand to depreciate. All right, and that is, okay, remember I said it can be good, it can be bad, depending on where you are, right? But we cannot have a rand that is too weak, okay? As soon as we decrease imports, less rand is being dumped on the market, so the rand has a time to recover, so we can appreciate the rand a little bit. Okay, remember a too strong rand is also not good, but we need to find that middle. All right, then the next reason is to protect natural resources from being exploited. All right, so when there's free trade, obviously free trade means that we are trading without any restriction. All right, now that means that our natural resources can be depleted because as soon as anybody wants natural resources, we take the resources out and we sell them. All right, so when there's free trade, it leads to higher levels of consumption. Everybody can just consume whatever they want without any kind of restriction. But when we use a policy of protectionism and conservation, we can make sure that our natural resources are not overexploited and that we can ensure the sustainable use. Now we want to use our natural resources sustainably. All right. So when we use these policies, we want to obviously look after our primary industries, primary sector industries, our farming, our farmers. We need to look after our mining industries because that's where our natural resources are being exploited. All right. So let's say, for example, we specialize in gold, for example, and all the countries buy gold from us because now that's what we specialize in and there's free trade and whatever. Obviously, we are going to try to take out as much gold as possible, sell as much gold as possible to everybody so that we can make money. But the minute that we increase our gold production, our gold exploitation, obviously this is a non-renewable resource. Okay, especially in mining, it is non-renewable. So we cannot replace what we are taking out. All right, so at some point it is going to get finished, it is going to be exhausted, and that is what we don't want. Even in agriculture, yes, it's renewable, but we need to keep it sustainable. We can't just plant and harvest and plant and harvest and plant and harvest. Remember, we have to be sustainable, all right? The soil needs to rest, we need to fertilize the soil, otherwise it is also not going to be renewable anymore, all right? So it's very important that we look after our natural resources so we can have policies that is protecting our natural resources from being depleted, sustainable usage. Right, then obviously protective measures creates government revenue, okay, because I said yesterday one of the big measures that we use to protect our industries is import tariffs, customs duties, and because this is a tax, obviously it goes straight to the government, so it adds to their revenue. Now, in developing countries, your poorer countries, their domestic tax base is very small, okay, so in very, very developing and poor countries, there are a lot of people, but a lot of those people living in poverty. So they don't necessarily contribute to taxes. There's not that many people that actually physically contribute to taxes. Even in South Africa, our tax base is relatively small compared to the population. All right. In South Africa, our population size is around 55 million. And if I remember correctly, the actual physical tax base is about 10 million people. All right. So there's not a lot and lots of people that are busy paying taxes, because there's not a lot of people in developing countries that earn incomes that is actually taxable. Yeah, the income is really low. If the income is low, they also pay a low amount in tax. All right. So these low incomes does not provide the government with a hell of a lot of taxes. So by levying import duties, it is an additional way for those governments to get some revenue. Obviously, because of the high levels of poverty, they need to spend a lot of money to relieve that poverty. So they need the tax revenue. And if they cannot get that from income tax in developing countries, this is an excellent source for them to actually add to their revenue, to increase their expenditure, to be able to afford their expenditure. Right. Then it also maintains the standard of living. Okay, now again, I said when there's imports from countries with relatively low wages, other countries that dump their stuff in South Africa or in developing countries, their production cost sometimes is cheaper because they don't have a lot of labor legislation. All right, so they pay relatively low wages. They don't have things like a minimum wage, and that means their production cost is low for an unfair reason. All right. So in those countries, because the workers don't receive a lot of money, obviously the standards of living is not going to be as high, right? In our country, where we have labor laws, we have minimum wages, so we have to pay them more. The local industries, we are trying to protect the standards of living. That's the whole purpose behind a minimum wage, is to ensure that a person can achieve at least a minimum living standard. They can satisfy their basic needs. We don't want to pay them that they can't even do anything with their money, right? So in our country, we have minimum wages. We pay them a decent or a reasonable amount of money so that we can protect their living standards. But in other countries, because they don't have minimum wages, they pay low wages, and now they come and dump their stuff here. And consumers buy the dumped stuff, instead of supporting our local industries, then our domestic industries are not going to be able to survive. All right. Our domestic businesses are going to have to decrease their prices so that our consumers will have to support them. Now, if we don't protect them, they're going to suffer. So what they need to do is they have to reduce their production costs so that they can get their costs down. And sometimes they do this by dismissing their workers. Okay, so they start retrenching workers because wages is like 80% of production cost in many cases. All right, so if they want to decrease their production cost to remain competitive, they're either going to retrench their workers and people are going to lose their jobs, which is what we don't want, or they're going to say, right, everybody keeps their job, but we are going to now reduce your wages and salaries. All right, so workers are going to earn less. Okay, now obviously in countries like ours where there's high levels of poverty and income inequality, it is very important that we don't do this. People need to earn decent wages and salaries so that we can avoid having an increase in poverty. We already have like over 50% of poverty. If we now allow our businesses to just decrease their production costs by decreasing wages or salaries, then again it is the people, the workers, that is going to be disadvantaged by this. Their standard of living is now going to decrease because they are going to earn less. All right. So instead of allowing this to happen, we protect our local industries. We say, no, you keep your production costs the same. You pay your decent wages and salaries. When these things from other countries comes in, countries like China, where they don't have labor laws and the production cost is lower because they pay such low wages, we are going to levy a tax and we're going to make those products look more expensive so that we can force our local people to buy from the local businesses so that we can protect the wages of the people working in those industries. Now, it is important that we protect the wages and salaries, that we protect the standards of living of the people in our country. We cannot allow our producers to reduce wages and salaries just so that they could be more competitive and survive. Now, we rather protect them, and then we protect the living standards of the workers in those industries as well. Right, plus then, any revenue from customs duties, so all that money that we earn from customs duties, as I said earlier, it adds to the revenue of the government. that gives the government more money that they can use in their budget to reduce poverty and create a more equal distribution of income. They can use this customs duty to pay child grants. They can use this customs duty to pay UIF. It's a tax. It belongs to the government. It goes into their kitty of revenue, and they use that revenue to reduce poverty, to provide services or to subsidize services for your poorer people. Okay, and then the last, sorry, not the last one. Okay, diversifying the industrial base. Okay, we did speak about diversification yesterday in that lesson as well. Remember, we need to avoid the disadvantages of over-specialization. Okay, any country that relies heavily on the export of only a few products, like gold, that's the example I used yesterday. If we rely only on gold and the gold price falls, gold is the only thing we have to sell. We are forced then to sell that gold at that low price. We are selling at a loss, but we need money, so we sell it anyway. We can't do that. That's over-specialization. We need to have a diversified industrial base. We need to have more than just a few products that we can produce and sell and export and whatever. All right. We cannot have our whole country's employment and income and GDP and growth and survival depending on one or two industries. Because if those industries goes belly up, if the prices fall or whatever happens, the demand falls or whatever, nobody wants it. We need to have other industries that we can rely on. All right, so we can use sometimes import restriction on certain products to make sure and to give our domestic industries time to develop so that they can get better at what they do, they can increase their production, and potentially in the future sometime we can also export. All right, if we look at South Africa's main export, of the top 5 exports, you will see that a lot of it is still minerals. Gold, coal, diamonds, it's all minerals. It's non-renewable. These things are non-renewable. We cannot keep relying on those things. We need to establish new industries. We need to get better at the production of manufactured goods that we can rely on when the gold and the diamonds and the coal is finished. We cannot over-specialize like that. We need a varied industrial base. We need to produce different things, lots and lots of different things that we can export and sell to earn an income. We cannot rely just on one or two things. All right, then the last advantage of protection or reason for protection is our declining industries. Okay, now sometimes when there's structural changes in supply and demand of a product, those industries are going to suffer. Okay, so a certain industry might be knocked severely if there's a big change in taste and habits of consumers and demand decreases completely. Okay, now your declining industries, or these industries where the demand is declining, that nobody really wants them anymore, whatever, they should be permitted to go out of business gradually. Now, any sudden changes is going to cause a shock to the economy, and that is going to cause unemployment and negative economic growth and whatever the case may be. So wherever there are declining industries, and there are things that people are just not interested in buying anymore, because something better has come along or they use something else instead or whatever the case may be, all right? But those industries, we must allow them to be phased out slowly. All right, so your declining industries are likely to be industries that no longer have a comparative advantage, right? So for some reason, they're just becoming inefficient. And as I said, nobody wants to buy their products anymore. It's going out of fashion. Nobody likes it anymore, whatever reason, all right? But as I said, if we let them a shock, if we allow that shock to the economy and they just close down suddenly, obviously there's going to be a sudden and large increase in unemployment, all right? If this happens gradually, if we protect them for a small while to enable them to decline gradually, we are allowing time for resources to be reallocated to other industries. We are allowing people that are working in these declining industries to receive training so that we can shift them into other industries. All right, because if your industry now is going out of fashion or it's not needed anymore, obviously, very soon you're not going to have a job, and we don't want that. We have an unemployment problem. We cannot allow that. So where there's declining industries, where demand is declining or they're just not competitive anymore, okay, their prices are going up, everybody else is cheaper, I don't know, their production methods suck or whatever the reason, but we need to protect them for a while to allow them to go out of the economy slowly. We give time for the resources to be transferred so that the shock to the economy is not as big. So we protect them for a small amount of time just to allow for that transfer to gradually happen. All right, and that's the argument for protection. Now, at the beginning of this lesson, I showed you that in your exam guideline, they no longer require you to know the arguments against protection. Okay, I am leaving it in the textbook because it used to be in the exam guideline, the previous guideline required this, and this used to be an essay question. It is not anymore, right? But I'm not going to take it out because then when the new exam guideline come next year, then I have to type it in again. Okay, I'm lazy, I admit. Okay, you are going to scratch out. You don't have to study arguments against protection. All right, I'm going to give you the page numbers. Okay, but arguments against protection, you're going to scratch that out. All right, it's all the way from countries tend to retaliate. This is on page 104. Okay, you scratch that out. B, disadvantages to consumers, you scratch it out in your textbook. Okay, that is all still on page 104. Then on page 105, businesses become less efficient. You scratch it out. All right, there's only 3. It's only a little bit, but at least it's like, what, half a page that you don't have to study. Remember to scratch it out. Don't go and study this because it's not on your exam guideline. It is not going to be asked. If you study this, you're wasting your time. Okay, that's it for today.